Greetings, folks. Let's talk a little bit about what it means to do close reading. Close reading is basically a term for literary analysis that came out of mid 20th century literary criticism, specifically I.A. Richards. It's related to biblical exegesis, so meaning the decipherment of the Bible by priests and scholars. For our purposes, though, it really means taking our time with a text and interacting with it. For me, close reading means reading with a pen in hand, and to, as I'm going through a first draft reading, just highlighting anything that intrigues me. Then, after doing a quick read through, I'll go back and interrogate the highlighted parts like a journalist. So, some of the things I'll do is I'll keep in mind the questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. I will look for patterns in the text. We have to make sure to go and read the footnotes. In our class, we have some really great annotated texts. We are using Norton editions, which are filled with footnotes as well as background reading, some of which you are reading in advance of the Barbald poem. So you'll want to check those out too in your doing your close reading. And finally, you'll want to look up what you don't know. That's critical. It's labor intensive, but it can help make a text more beautiful for you. It can also help make a text more problematic. A case in point is our reading from John Gregory. I just want to take you through my experience of doing a close reading with this text. Okay, so we know this is John Gregory. That's maybe part of the who, but we also want to ask, who is John Gregory and for whom is he writing? This is a situation where the footnote at the bottom of the page comes in very handy. We're told that, he's an author, he's a professor of medicine, and he's participating in a tradition of educating women on propriety. These are called conduct books. So basically, when we're talking about who, we're talking about an audience of young women, mothers as well, who are responsible for educating their daughters. So as we know that, we want to think a little bit about the title of the text. It says a father's legacy to his daughter. We want to think a little bit about the word legacy and then to his daughter. I mean, in a way, we have to ask, is it true that he is writing exclusively for his daughter? As I was doing my reading, I noted that there were some terms that popped up, like female character and girl, that tipped me off to the idea that Gregory is not writing exclusively for his own daughter. He is writing for a much larger audience, right? So who is he addressing? He's addressing the young women. So that's the first step in our close reading. The next step for me has to do with looking at the question of when the text is written. Again, the footnotes come in handy. We know the text is published in 1774, and it's part of this tradition of basically mansplaining. No. Well, actually, I've been waiting all this time to use that joke. Yeah, Gregory is the original mansplainer. Conduct books are mansplaining. I kid. But it is participating in a particular tradition that was seeking to control female behavior. Okay, so we've addressed the question of when. Now we want to think about this question of where. So as you read through the text, you'll note that the environments that Gregory is particularly concerned about are, we want to ask, is he worried about what women are doing at home or not? If we look carefully at the text, we can see from the very first line of the excerpt that he is concerned with helping his daughters behave a certain way in the public eye. So we've got the public eye here. He also references a conversation with gentlemen speaking to women in public. There are a few situations. So really, this legacy that Gregory is leaving has to do with behavior in public. Okay. So these are, as we ask the questions, we're starting to come up with answers that give us a better sense of the real meaning of this text. I mean, we know from the outset that he seems to be giving his daughters a lot of advice. So now we want to think a little bit more about, and we know that he's giving advice for behavior in public. So let's look a little bit more at what he is telling his daughters. One of the things I noted as I was reading was the repetition of this idea of modesty. It's in the first line. He says that the chief beauty of a female character is modesty. He talks about women blushing and how enticing that is. Again, the term modesty comes up, silent in company. He is not advocating a gregarious daughter. He's also very particular about the kinds of conversations she has with men. Here, I make a note that, so one of the things that I noted as I was reading he mentions that conversing with men of even the first rank necessitates avoiding the most distant familiarity, or those folks may find themselves feeling superior. Now, when I looked at this paragraph, I had to ask myself, gee, familiarity means, for us, it means, getting to know somebody in a more intimate sense. And it's kind of a good thing. Oh yes, I'm familiar with that person. We're familiar with one another. But here there is a particular power relationship that Gregory is trying to define. So this might be a term, familiarity. That might be something that you might want to look up as you're trying to interrogate what is being said. Going farther down, I noted that that Gregory is very concerned about the kinds of jokes women engage in. Um, that's just essentially what he's talking about. He's okay, there's this term indelicacy. Consider every species of indelicacy in conversation as shameful in itself as it is highly disgusting to us. So here's a term that you might want to look up. I tell you, it does not mean, it means something, it has a sexual connotation. He doesn't want them telling jokes about our body in any way. And there's another reference to it here that double entendre is of this sort. This is there's a lot of double entendre and wit, but essentially he doesn't want his daughters or women in general conveying anything that undermines their virgin purity. So that's, I mean, that's the major message from this excerpt of John Gregory, that we don't, that he wants women to preserve their sexual innocence in the eyes of the men with whom they engage. Now, so that's the basic message, be quiet, be pure, and all will be well. That's the message. But we have to ask ourselves, what is at stake in this particular message? That this is where we really start to get into the nitty-gritty of the text. When we wonder what's at stake, that's another of the what questions. In this case, what's at stake is marriage and sexuality and what kinds of wealth and riches are tied up in marriage. Essentially, Gregory doesn't want women tossing around their availability willy-nilly. He wants still to be able to control how women marry. We see this particularly in the us versus you language of the text. Right here, it's actually, we can find it pretty very quickly that he allies, all men in the same way that, it's our sex, it's an us versus them sort of language that he adopts, and it is the women's duty to please the us, the them. See right here that it's disgusting to us. We touched on that before. So we also want to think about, how are women being constructed in relation to men? And even though Gregory overtly says that he doesn't want certain types of men to feel themselves superior to women, in general, the whole message is that we should be able to determine how you women behave in public and what is acceptable to us. So this is something that we wouldn't necessarily, we have to spend time with this text, thinking it through to be able to appreciate all of this. So as you approach the Barbald, what I'd like you to do is very much take your time, highlight the terms that I suggest are of interest, reflect on these and ask the questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. Think about the patterns. Think about if they make sense. And if they don't, that might be a point to investigate in the future. Okay? So I hope you enjoy your close reading of the Barbald poem and the Wollstonecraft. I'll see you in the discussion boards.